Into Margins, and I'm your host, Ralph Newell, and today's guest is Dr. George Pruitt, President Emeritus of Thomas Edison State University and author of the book From Protest to President. Welcome, Dr. Pruitt.
Well, thank you. Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we formally met, I guess, at Natty a few years ago. I definitely had seen you around at different conferences. And I was intrigued when I got your book, and I thought it would be fitting for us to talk about it for Black History Month. And when I was looking at the photos in your book, I saw a picture of you and your wife with former Congressman and civil rights icon John Lewis. It appears this picture was taken right after he received the John Hope Franklin Award from Diverse Issues in Higher Ed. And as we think about the current political climate and the revisionist history that is currently afoot, I have two questions for you. Do you think we'll continue to have Black History Month, Native American, Hispanic Heritage, and other related national celebration months? And what was your impression and thoughts about the legacy of John Lewis?
Well, I think whether we're going to celebrate those months depends a lot on us.
Hmm.
I mean, it's nice to have a national holiday that pays attention to the unique contributions of various parts of our country and history and democracy. But I also think that we have the opportunity to decide for ourselves what and when we're going to celebrate our history and our contribution to American life and history. But I certainly hope that the rest of the country continues to join in on that recognition and acknowledgement, not only of Black History Month, but all of the other kinds of celebrations of the quilt that makes up our fabric of our country. As to John Lewis, he was an extraordinary man and an icon and an inspiration to all of us. I'm a contemporary of his. So it's funny that when you look back on your life and you live long enough, where your lived experience is today's history. And so many of the events that John Lewis dedicated his life to intersected with things that I observed and were part of myself. One of the things that's so remarkable about John Lewis is that he dedicated his life to service. And he never stopped that commitment. I mean, he could have gone off and done other things, but he didn't. He stayed true to his commitment about making this country true to the promise of it that it holds, but it's never fully achieved. I hope that contemporary leadership can learn from him. I hope that that model influences others. I see a contemporary world where we are distracted by personal ambition, personal advancement, personal achievement, personal success. Those are all wonderful things. But those things are important when they're in the context of service to others and to our community. And I worry sometimes that social media and popular culture emphasizes the personal achievement at the expense of the collective achievement. And also taking responsibility and accountability for how our actions and our behavior affect us generally, not just individually. And I hope that others know and learn of John Lewis's history. I'm a little disappointed sometimes when I see and find people, our people, that don't understand our history or misinterpret our history because they get reduced, marginalized, and sloganized. And so they lose continuity with what has come before them. I'm not one that believes in preoccupied with what was the past. I think we need to be forward-looking.
Right.
But I think we need to understand where we've been, how we got there today, and how we build on what came before us. The world doesn't start when we came on the scene. And so I hope we continue to celebrate John Lewis. I think hope we continue to celebrate African American History Month, not just for people of color, but for all Americans, because the African American story is the American story. And we're in a period now where that's trying to get disaggregated, and that's not a good thing for us.
No, not at all. I totally agree. And when we talk about our history, one of the things that intrigued me in the book was you talked about, your time meeting Malcolm X. That did not intrigue me the most. The person that intrigued me the most that you met was Fred Hampton, which is someone who doesn't get talked about as much. But tell us about him and what impact he had on you and or your students at that time.
Well, Fred Hampton was a remarkable, remarkable man. And
Hmm.
I don't think his story is told or given the attention it deserves. His assassination by law enforcement in Chicago got a lot of attention. There was a movie made about it.
Right.
But the real impact of him was the life he led before that happened. I met him when I was working at Illinois State University, and we invited him to speak, and he came down. And he touched me, but he touched all of us. He was an extraordinary, gifted, and insightful person. And for him, a civil rights struggle was more than that. It was a human rights struggle. And I think part of the reason that he was such a threat is that when you followed him around Chicago, he would go, Chicago is a very balkanized city.
Hmm.
Black folks live all on the South Side, few on the West Side. And there's Polish communities, and there's Greek communities, and there's Irish communities, and there's Italian communities. There weren't, when I was growing up, any integrated communities. It
Right.
was it was these balkanizations, and Richard Daley was a master of coalition politics. He organized these ethnic fiefdoms into a unified city under his leadership, both good for good results and not so good results. Fred saw the struggle of Black people as the struggle of all people. And
Hmm.
he spent a lot of time going into places. You know, when I grew up in Chicago, if you went into the wrong neighborhood, you would be physically assaulted.
Hmm.
I mean, people got killed, literally got killed for Black folks for being in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time.
Hmm.
Fred Hampton went into those neighborhoods and talked to people about their struggles and their trials and made common links with him. And that's what made him so threatening. I'm glad that his death was so well documented. The trial that took place where the family and survivors sued the law enforcement and the city and the federal government, and they settled it for a fairly significant sum of money that made a statement that they were guilty of what they
Hmm.
did. People need to read and know more about him, but I am disappointed that more isn't told about his life, that so much emphasis is given to his death.
Yeah. Speaking of his life, it was so short. I had read and heard things about him, through the years, but it wasn't until I saw the movie that you're talking about that when I looked it up to realize I think, was only 21,
Yeah,
something
he
like
was
that.
again, he was our age.
Yeah.
So when he was assassinated, it was personal for us. He
Hmm.
was our friend, he was our contemporary, he was our age.
Right.
And he separated himself because the man was absolutely gifted and brilliant.
Hmm.
And he had the ability, an analytical mind and quick and eloquent voice, where he made complex things understandable. And he was able to define common ground for a lot of people that you would not normally associate. And he was building coalitions in Chicago,
Hmm.
cross-racial, cross-ethnic lines, which I had not seen before or since.
Right. Right. Okay. So we learned a little bit about your time there, growing up in at least how Chicago was. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background and what initially inspired you to pursue a career in higher ed?
Yeah, most Black folks from Chicago are migrants from Mississippi. If you follow the Illinois Central Railroad that starts in New Orleans, comes up through Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois to Chicago, and many people have written about the Great Migration.
Hmm.
Well, that's what populated Chicago. And so even though I lived on the south side of Chicago, I was born in a little town called Canton, Mississippi. And Canton's a little town 20 miles north of Jackson. And my mother went home to have me and my brother. Me and my brother and all of my cousins were born in my grandparents' home. And our uncle, who was the only Black doctor in town, delivered all of us. My uncle was the Affordable Care Act for Canton, Mississippi. He took care of
Hmm.
all the healthcare needs of Black folks in Canton and in Madison County. And after his passing, the Public Health Center in Madison County in Canton is named after him. I'm named after him. He delivered me. His name was George A. Carmichael. My name is George A. Pruitt. He delivered me, and I'm named after him. If you would go to Mississippi in the summertime, all the license plates were from Illinois. People came back to visit their grandparents, and I did that. So in time, until my grandparents died when I was a senior in high school, and even after that, when my uncle and aunt were there, I spent my summers in Mississippi and the rest of the time in Chicago. So I had this bicultural upbringing, the urban North, the rural South. But both of them were rigidly segregated and violent. My brother and I, we were in Mississippi. We had just left when Emmett Till was killed.
Mm-hmm.
I write about this in the book. Emmett Till was 14, same age as my brother.
Mm.
He's 5 years older than me. I was 9. And that, again, was a personal experience for us. And when they brought Emmett Till's body back to Chicago, Mrs. Till wouldn't let the morticians restore the corpse. She left it as mutilated as he was to make a statement about what Mississippi was like and what had happened to her son. And my father, who worked on the railroad, but was also a mortician, he knew Mr. Rayner, who handled the body. And he took my brother and I with him and my mother when they went to see Emmett Till's body. Of course, the pictures were in Jet magazine on the front page of the Chicago Defender. They were everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But he wanted my brother and I to make sure we understood what kind of place we were in when we were out of Chicago. Well, hell, we were in Mississippi. We knew what kind of place we were in.
Right.
I talked to, contemporary Black folks, they talk about microaggressions.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I had microaggressions to deal with.
Right.
We were worried about getting killed.
Mm-hmm.
And later, when we began to become activists in the civil rights movement, we were assaulted. I had a bottle thrown in my head. So, I could have been okay with microaggressions at the time.
Yeah.
So that framed my worldview. And my first bit of activism occurred when I was in high school. And we joined SNCC. And in 1963, organized a boycott of the Chicago public school system to get the superintendent fired, because Chicago at the time had the most segregated school system of any urban city, any city in the North. And with all the trappings of it, the schools on the South Side were underfunded, overcrowded. Many of the teachers weren't even accredited, while the white schools were enjoying the exact opposite. So we started protesting that. That was not acceptable to us anymore. We were angry about that. And so that was my introduction to activism and in the civil rights movement. When I went away to the University of Illinois in Champaign, there were 35,000 students at the university. There were about 230 Black students. I'm not aware of a single Black faculty member at the University of Illinois or any administrators.
Mm-hmm.
We were angry about that. And so we began to organize and we began to protest to try to make sure that the university was more accessible and available to people of color. In my junior year, I transferred to Illinois State University. I left University of Illinois to get away from a foreign language requirement. I don't think I ever would have finished college if I had to pass a foreign language. My mind just doesn't get my head around foreign languages. So I went to Illinois State University. And there they were about 17,000, 18,000 students, 135 Black students, 1 Black faculty member, 1 Black administrator. And we began the same agitation. The title of the book comes from Protest to President, because the first time I saw the inside of a president's office, we formed a Black Student Association. I was elected the first president, and we promptly took over the president's office and issued our non-negotiable demands, which is what you did during the time. Fortunate for us, we didn't know what was going to happen when we did that. We didn't know whether we were going to get arrested, beaten, kicked out of school. We had prepared for those contingencies and was prepared to accept those consequences. Fortunately, the president of Illinois State University was a wonderful man named Sam Braden, and he had a wonderful cabinet around him. And they embraced and they joined into a partnership with us about making change that we all agreed was time and necessary and productive. So from the time I could remember, I was going to be a doctor. There's no question about it. I used to follow my uncle around. I helped him deliver a baby in Mississippi when I was 12 years old. I used to watch. I had my appendix taken out when I was 10. He took me in the operating room and showed me appendectomy, so I knew what I was going to experience. It was a really interesting experience. So there was no question about what I was going to do. I was going to be a doctor. When I got in about a junior in college, I majored in biology. I minored in chemistry. I looked at the doctors in my family and I saw the passion they had for medicine. It was not just something, an occupation, it was who they were.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew I didn't have that commitment to it. And
Mm-hmm.
as on reflection, I thought, you know, really, I think I wanted to be my uncle because I just idolized him. He was very important in my life, as was my
Mm-hmm.
father. I think if my uncle had been a plumber, I would have wanted to be a plumber. And that's not motivation to do what's necessary. So I walked away from, I still love the sciences. I graduated with my degree in biology and chemistry, still love the sciences today.
Mm-hmm.
But I was thinking about looking at other things in terms of a career. When we issued our demands, we entered into a partnership with the university. When I graduated from the university, they offered me a position at the university to work and build on the programs that we had negotiated and agreed to work on. I liked it. I enjoyed it. We did wonderful things. We transformed Illinois State University.
Mm-hmm.
We tripled the Black enrollment. We were the only public institution, though, by doing that, the students in our program actually had a higher retention rate than the white students at the university.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no compromising quality of standards, and we did very, very, very well. A colleague at Illinois State, a guy named James Fisher, took the presidency at Towson University. And when he went, he recruited a guy named Kenneth Shaw as his provost. And Shaw and Fisher recruited me to go with them to Towson.
Mm-hmm.
And it was there that they began to talk to me about making a career of higher education and aspire to the presidency. I want to say a little bit about that aspiration, though.
Mm-hmm. Go
I
ahead.
never aspired to the presidency
Mm-hmm.
out of any sense of personal ambition. That was not why I was interested. I had gotten invested in higher education. I wanted to reform it. I wanted to change it.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I was protesting against it, it wasn't because I didn't admire it. I wanted it to be better. And I wanted to be accessible to broader people. I understood the power of the institution. And I wanted higher education to change. And both Shaw and Fisher convinced me that if that was my motivation, the best platform for creating that change was the presidency.
Mm-hmm.
And they began to tell me that I should consider that. And I did. And it came to me quickly. And I moved from Towson State to Morgan State University. Had an extraordinary experience at Morgan. They honored me with an honorary degree year before last, which I'm very, very proud of.
Yeah.
I left Morgan and went to Tennessee State University, and I had one of the greatest adventures of my life
Mm-hmm.
when I was at Tennessee State University and worked under the direction of Frederick S. Humphreys, who was the president of Tennessee State. Fred
Yeah.
Humphreys is one of the great presidents that American higher education ever produced.
Absolutely.
What he did at Tennessee State was remarkable. It would take too long to go into the court case that we won, but we had to refight the Civil War. We won a federal court case where we were defendants in the case. We supported the plaintiff's position, which was an interesting place to be. As a
Mm-hmm.
result of that court case, led by a brilliant civil rights attorney named Avon Williams, who was also a state senator from Nashville, we won that case. And for the first time in American history, there was a desegregation case where we took over the University of Tennessee at Nashville. It was the first time that in a desegregation case, the Black institution survived.
Mm-hmm.
In every other case, from K through 12 or higher education, court-ordered desegregation mergers meant shutting down the Black institution and the Black kids had to go to the white school. This was the first time where it went the other way. And
Right.
the University of Tennessee at Nashville became the downtown campus of Tennessee State University. And now it's called, and then it was named the Avon Williams campus of Tennessee State University. It was very fitting. It was a wonderful time. After Fred left Tennessee State, he went to Florida A&M University.
Yeah.
It had the same magnificent outcomes in his leadership there. Unfortunately, neither Tennessee State nor Florida and A&M have had leadership since that came
That's
up to
true.
the standard of Fred Humphreys. So it was a huge contribution he made, but a huge loss when he stepped off of the scene. I left Tennessee State and I was recruited to be executive vice president of the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning in Columbia, Maryland. After about a year and a half, it was an adult serving institution. I was asked to serve as the third president of Thomas Edison State University in New Jersey. And I stayed there for 35 years.
Yeah.
At the time I stepped down, I was the longest serving public college president in the country. And I never intended to be here 35 years. But I never had 2 years with the same. I never got stale. Inertia never took over. And I'm extraordinarily proud of what my colleagues and I achieved at this institution that was unique because it's created especially to serve self-directed, mature, older students.
Hmm.
So that's the path.
Right. Okay. It was very interesting, to read about all that. What also intrigued me was, and I'm just looking at a snippet here. When I looked at your family tree in higher ed, your family has a cavalcade of rock stars. I'm looking at, doctors, Levi Watkins, Jim Rennick, Beverly Guy Sheftall. I mean, these are all people that we've talked about in diverse over the past, 30, 40 years. I'm interested to know, what do you guys talk about at family reunions?
Well, I am blessed with having some extraordinarily talented people in our family. And it's amazing what this little town, Canton, Mississippi, produced because
Hmm.
we all go back to Canton, Mississippi. And yeah, I don't have an explanation for it, but you are right about it. I mean, and there are people that I didn't write about in the book. I had one of my mother's first cousin was a guy named James Evans.
Okay.
And James Evans's mother was a woman named Lily Carmichael Evans. She was my grandfather's sister.
Hmm.
She has a school in Miami named after her. It's the Lily
Hmm.
C. Evans School. And she had three children, James, George, and a daughter named Ruby. James Evans was at what now is West Virginia State University. At the start of World War II, he was asked to train black pilots.
Hmm.
And he did. And he was recruited by the Pentagon. And he went to the Pentagon, and he was the one that lobbied for and helped create the Tuskegee Airmen. And
Okay.
he went to MIT,
Hmm.
got a master's degree there, and there's a plaque in James Evans's honor at MIT where they describe him as the godfather of the Tuskegee Airmen. His brother George Evans practiced medicine in Greensboro he lived to be over 100 years old.
Wow.
When the people who occupied the cafeterias in the lunch counter boycotts in Greensboro and were beaten, George Evans was the physician that treated them and took care of them at no charge. He was also the physician for Bennett College, and he at no charge. So, I'm just blessed. And you mentioned my cousin Levi and Jim Rennick and Beverly. Not only that they were brilliant and talented, but one thing that none of us ever talked about was our professional achievements.
Mm-hmm.
I have a sign on my wall. I'm sure she didn't make it up, but Lillian Watkins, who was Levi's mother
Hmm.
and Beverly's aunt, and it says, "Let your work speak for you, and you will never have to say anything about yourself."
Amen.
And if you knew James Rennick, and if you knew Levi Watkins, and if you know Beverly Guy Sheftall, you won't hear them talking about their achievements and their accomplishments.
Right.
And I don't know, we were blessed to have the capacity to do those things, but I'm proud of the temperament of the family that we did it because we did work that deserved to be done.
Hmm.
And wherever we were, and that's why we did it. We didn't do it for recognition, position, stature, or money.
Right.
Now, I'm not a fan. I mean, I don't ask anybody to take a vow of poverty. I think money is good.
Right.
But I hope, back to what I said earlier, I would love to see some residue of that culture where we felt obligated to work on behalf of the benefit of our community and make sure that the community was the beneficiary of our work and talents instead of the personal wealth benefit or achievement that comes from individual work. I'm proud of a lot of Black folks. I'm proud of us. There's a lot of progress things we've made, I still look back. I'm seeing us lose, though, that issue about where we take responsibility for each other's welfare,
Mm-hmm.
where we worry about what happens to one of us is happening to all of us. I I envy my Jewish brothers and sisters in a lot of ways because when Israel and Gaza was attacked, and it was a horrible atrocity,
Mm-hmm.
and no grievance can defend what happened uh, in Israel. Although I have great sympathy to the struggle of the Palestinian people as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I've looked at how the Jewish community worldwide rallied around to protect our Jewish brothers and sisters from anti-Semitism in this country and to make sure that they were protected overseas. I want us to be like that too.
Yeah.
And I don't see us like that now.
Yeah. I wasn't planning on going down this road, but you brought up the situation in Israel and Gaza. And, along with that came a lot of student protests on campuses, this past year. You yourself was a protester when you were in college. Now the current administration is, threatening to withhold funds from schools that allow protests to happen, this, that, and the other. If you were sitting in the president's seat now, how would you respond to that if you had students that wanted to protest, but yet your funding was being threatened? I think you even talked about that in your book that happened at one of the schools you were working at when you were a student
Yeah.
protester. Yeah.
First of all, these issues are enormously complicated.
Mm-hmm.
But there is one thing I want to say, the presidency right now is experiencing the highest turnover in the history of the country.
Yeah.
The average tenure of a president is the shortest that it's ever been in the history of the country. And in the surveys that have taken, the regard and respect for higher education is the lowest that it has ever been in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And the explanation that you hear from that is that these are the times that are unprecedented in their difficulty and in their toxicity. I like to push back on that because
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's true. Senator McCarthy in the 50s was banning books and blacklisting faculty members as well as entertainers and authors
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the communist threat. Some of the demonstrations that were triggered and riots that were triggered after the assassination of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and Malcolm X, and as a result of the Vietnam War protests, college campuses were shut down and literally were on fire. And students were killed
Mm-hmm.
at Kent State, Jackson State, and Southern University.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't have the turnover then that we have now. So I'm not saying that the problems today are the same problems. They are not. They are very different. But to say that what we're going through now is worse than what we went through then, it's just not true.
Oh,
So
I definitely don't think it's worse. Yeah.
yeah, they're not worse. You can't say that this is worse than that. There aren't campuses being burned down. Campuses are open, and students aren't being killed. No
Mm-hmm.
one's being killed, and I thank God. I think two things. I think a university and a university president has an obligation to protect the safety of their students, their faculty, and their communities. That's an important obligation. I think they also have an obligation to keep their institutions open and functioning and available to the people that want to take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think they have a right and obligation to protect the academy as a neutral forum and marketplace of the free exchange of ideas, as long as it's done civilly and respectfully in a way that's not disruption. I think university presidents have a right to defend academic freedom and free speech. But academic freedom and free speech does not enable one to engage in hate speech or to
Right.
call for the murder of people or to intimidate and bully and attack people so they feel unsafe to walk on their campuses. And that
Mm.
has happened to both Jewish students and Palestinian students.
Right.
And so, or Arab students. And so it is a tough thing, but the presidents have to defend and protect their campuses that way. On the other hand, you have to also protect the right of protest, as
Mm-hmm.
long as it is peaceful and non-disruptive. I've encouraged students that are protesters to read Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. Martin Luther King was a proponent of civil disobedience and nonviolent protest. The civil disobedience requires that if you're going to break the law, if you're going to violate the rules knowingly as an act of conscience, you do so expecting and accepting to accept the consequences. Disruption and chaos without accountability is anarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I encourage people, that students and faculty and activists that want to protest, but protest lawfully and peacefully and non-disruptively. But if you decide that you're going to engage in civil disobedience, don't do it unless you're also prepared to accept the consequences. The moral authority of your protest comes from the willingness to accept the consequences. Just tearing up stuff for the sake of disruption, and in some of the demonstrations we had, the objective was disruption. The objection was not change.
Right.
And so it's not simple, it's complicated, but that's the job of the president and the campus, to be able to manage those things. We have to stay open. We also have to stay open as a place where people can argue and debate, but it has to be done in a way where people are safe, they're not threatened, or their points of view aren't respected.
Yeah. Yeah. As you were mentioning just a few minutes ago there, about the shortness of the presidential tenure now, I actually had looked this up prior to us talking. It's just shy of 6 years now, and to your point, is at the lowest that it's been. Now, you led Thomas Edison for over 35 years. So, and I know you talk about, you and your family, you're not people that boast, but what what do you feel was your greatest achievement in your 35 years at Thomas Edison?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I think there's a lot of them. I'm proud of the
Hmm.
fact that what happened at Tennessee State,
Hmm.
the fact of what we achieved there, that was an extraordinary effort.
Yeah.
With a team of people supported by a broader community with great leadership and a wonderful lawyer. I think that was, and I'm grieving about what's happening in Tennessee State now. It's breaking
Hmm.
my heart to see what's going
Hmm.
on in Nashville. That was really important. Thomas Edison was important to me too. We were a niche institution. Our mission was, we were created to provide high quality collegiate learning opportunities for self-directed adults.
Hmm.
The average age of our student body was about 40.
Oh, wow.
We wouldn't admit students under the age of 21 unless they had a community college degree or were an active duty military.
Hmm.
We basically created and opened up higher education, us and a few other institutions. Higher education, before us, higher education was pretty much the exclusive purview of 18 to 22-year-olds.
Hmm.
Now, there were evening programs and marginal programs, but adults were tolerated. Now there are more adults going to college than 18-year-olds.
Right.
We have a lot to do with that change. As far as I can tell, we were the first accredited college or university in the country to develop an online degree program where you could get a degree exclusively online. We were the first one to do that, I think, as far as we can tell.
Hmm.
And the quality of the work was exceptionally high. So, and our students went on. Now, we were never an online school. Let me say that quickly. We were an adult serving institution. The online stuff was just one arrow in the quiver to be able to allow adult students to still keep their family, their career, and their work, and still go to school and earn their degrees. And our graduates went on to be accepted at some of the finest graduate professional schools in the country. Every one of the Ivy League has students that have graduate degrees from Thomas Edison. So I was exceptionally proud of that. We made a contribution to nursing education.
Hmm.
Most of the nurses in the country got their degrees from hospital schools or community colleges. They got an associate's degree, became RNs. The nursing profession moved to having the baccalaureate degree to be the threshold standard. We created a baccalaureate program for existing RNs where they could get their baccalaureate degree. They were the most experienced nurses in the society. And at one point in time, we had the largest school of nursing in New Jersey. And these were all experienced RNs who'd been in the field practicing. These weren't people right out of colleges. We made a contribution to the military. It used to be you join the military and the rewards were, all these great things will happen to you when you leave the military. All the
Hmm.
benefits came after you left. Somebody got the idea that the biggest expenditure of the military budget is training, more than equipment, aircraft carriers, bullets. Wouldn't it be better if we figured out a way to keep these people in the military instead of getting rid of them? So they
Right.
decided to provide tuition assistance so that students could get their degree while they were active duty. Problem is, if you're in active duty, you move all around, you're in strange locations. Colleges didn't know how to do that. So they
Right.
came to us, and we were in a pilot program with 15 other institutions to create the processes and methodology where active duty military could get their degrees while they were on active duty service. And during the height of the Gulf War, I had 4,000 Thomas Edison students in theater in Iraq, Afghanistan, and in ships in the Gulf. And we lost 22 of our students to combat fatalities. So we
Mm-hmm.
opened up higher education to the military. These are extraordinarily changes in the entire higher education fabric of the country that we pioneered and created. Of course, other institutions since came on and got involved with it. So when you look back, we literally changed the face of American higher education, and that's something I'm really proud of. And we did it. We did not do it at the expense of the quality of the work we did.
Hmm. So we talked about your achievements. That is astonishing. I didn't even know that level of detail about the military education part of it. You talked about a number of challenges in your book, and we all face a number of challenges. But are there any challenges you didn't mention in the book that you'd like to share that you overcame, or how you overcame them?
I don't know how to talk about that. It's not that I'm bashful about it,
Hmm.
but people of my age understand this. When I would spend the night with my grandmother, and she lived on a highway, there wasn't much traffic going by her house. And when I'm in Mississippi in the 40s and the 50s and the early 60s, and a car would come down the road and I was from Chicago, I would be scared. When I lived in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago, and where all that killing is going on now, that's where I grew up. It wasn't anything like that when I was there, although four of my classmates were murdered while so it wasn't it was never Disneyland.
Right.
But when my friends and I went out at night, we always had our situational awareness about whether we were going to get jumped, whether it was safe. And you live with this baseline of anxiety, both in Mississippi and in Chicago, that just kind of stays with you all the time. When you grow up and you get away from all of that, you look back on that and say, that wasn't normal. It was normal for us because it's all we knew.
Hmm.
We were motivated to activism in a period where there were real consequences for activism. People got killed. People had their houses burned down. When my father bought our house on 76th and Vernon, it was a neighborhood in transition. And Black folks that were moving into those communities, my father, the first couple of nights we moved in, we stayed in the apartment while he stayed there with a gun
Hmm.
because we didn't know whether our house was going to be firebound.
Right.
So I don't know how you talk about that. And
Mhm.
people of my age and my generation that lived in the places where I was, we all had to struggle with that.
Yeah.
And we had psychological issues that we had to deal with in terms of our own ability to go outside of the bubble we were confined to and compete in a broader society. Those were all challenges we had to confront. And other people didn't have to confront those challenges. And a lot of people today don't have to confront those challenges. So it's hard to talk about that in a way that I think people can understand and internalize today when we have generations that have gone by since then. And thank God, my daughter and my children and my grandson don't have to deal with those issues.
No, absolutely. My father and you are contemporaries age-wise, and so he shared some of those. It's almost like you guys are speaking verbatim, the same thing. And yeah, it's something he didn't talk about that much, but he talked about it to us. And now when I look at my children, they just have no idea. You
We
know,
don't. They
I mean,
don't.
I can't really tell it to them. That's why I used to always try and get them to spend as much time with their grandparents as they could, so they could hear and understand some of these stories. So that it can have impact on your life and influence you and shape who you are. And earlier you talked a lot about your Uncle Doc on this interview and also in the book. But besides him, who else would you say has influenced you the most along the way and why?
Well, a lot of people. I mean, I don't leave out my father.
Hmm.
My
Hmm.
father was an extraordinary man. I mean, he was from Texarkana, Texas. He went to Prairie View, but didn't graduate because they couldn't afford it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he moved out of Texarkana, part of the Great Migration, went to Chicago, worked on the railroad, put himself to mortuary school at night, working part-time. He got his finished mortuary school the year I was born. I mean, he was an extraordinary man, and I have great respect and admiration for him. I admired him. He was not a demonstrative guy,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but I was, you know, I was proud of my father. I saw the sacrifice that he made for me and my brother and my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw how hard he worked. I saw the indignities he sometimes even had to put up. He was a very proud man.
Mm-hmm.
And when he ran on the railroad from Chicago to New Orleans on a train called the Panama Limited, and then went back up to Chicago, he's waiting on people going through Kentucky, Tennessee, and Mississippi. And a proud Black man working on some people who are often not very nice.
Right.
They're all white. And the way he managed that, I'm very proud of him. Malcolm had a great, it wasn't an intimate experience, but Malcolm Malcolm X had a great effect on me.
Mm. Okay.
I write about it in the book. I ran into him, he was in a barbershop. I didn't know who he was.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that were coming out of his mouth, I'd never heard anybody talk like that. And the things that he said that stuck with me, you know, we got into an argument. He liked it because I'd argue with him. He was explaining to me about the X thing, about how Black folks don't know anything about their background, so their last names were not legitimate, and that's why they use the word X. And I responded, I'm not changing my name because my last name is my daddy's name, and I don't care who owned it by the end, and I'm not changing my name.
Right, right.
And he would laugh. But the serious things he said to me that stayed with me to this day, he said basically, you know, there's a famous quote, and I write about this in the book. Muhammad Ali has this famous quote that said, "You don't get to decide who I am."
Right. I saw that. Yeah.
That that wasn't Malcolm. That wasn't Muhammad Ali. That came right out of Malcolm X's mouth. I heard that from Malcolm X in a barbershop on the south side of Chicago long before Muhammad Ali came on the story.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
he talked about the fact that life can be difficult and unfair, but you have to own your own life, take charge of it. And I have used this in speeches, and I've told this commencement to students, you don't get the life you deserve. You get the life you create.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to take ownership of your life and the decisions you make to create the life you want to have. And that was Malcolm's central thesis. That was his major lesson to Black folks. You know, that we have to be self-reliant, self-sufficient, and own the career we want to have, and own it, and stop complaining and whining about other people.
Yeah.
That we have to be the stewards of our own life and do the things necessary to create the lives that we want to have. He was a great influence. There were some extraordinary mentors I had. James Fisher, I mentioned him. He was
Mm-hmm.
president of Towson State University. He was president of the Council for Advancement to Support the Education Case. There's a James L. Fisher Award named for him. He was the first one to start telling me I should think about being a college president. And from a kid from the south side of Chicago, born in Mississippi, to think about being a college president, I had never crossed my mind.
Right.
And he saw something in me that I certainly didn't see. And he mentored me. Kenneth Shaw, who I mentioned, he went out to Towson with Jim as the provost. But Shaw went on to be president of Southern Illinois University. Then he went on to be president of the University of Wisconsin. And his masterpiece was at Syracuse University. If you go to Syracuse today, the quadrangle at Syracuse is the Kenneth A. Shaw quadrangle. And he is my good friend to this day. He lives in Chicago and in Springfield. I touch base with him, you know, every now and then. These people had an extraordinary effect on my life. They were mentors of mine. One of the things that they have influenced in me, I did start this early in my life, and I had a bunch of my colleagues and peers that we used to hang out together, including my cousin Jim Rennick and Charlie Nelms and some other people that you know. We all
Mm-hmm.
kind of grew up together, but I was always a little, in terms of my career, a little bit ahead of them because I started out earlier. And the idea of mentoring people and doing for others what was done for me is something I'm doing to this day. When I stepped out of the presidency, I decided I wanted to spend the time I have left working on the thing about the next generation of college leadership. Charlie Nelms was, I think you know Charlie. Charlie was
Mm-hmm.
one of, he was former president of North Carolina Central. president of the University of Michigan, at Flint, and a couple of other places. Charlie was one of the founders of the Millennium Leadership Institute from the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. I was one of those founders too, as was Jim Rennick and a bunch of other people. We have always accepted the responsibility about bringing forth the next generation. And Charlie and I are to this day doing this work. I teach a senior executive higher education masterclass. It's very selective, it's invitation only, because I want, back to the turnover in the presidency, the campuses and the trustees, this is a tough job. It is not for everyone. And the trustees and the campuses have lost track of the kind of attributes necessary to be successful and temperament necessary to be successful in these difficult jobs. And so they're hiring really nice, great, smart people, but that are unprepared for the challenges of the office. And that's why there is the turnover. The other reason is that the motivation as to why people come into this is the source of the turnover. When I also work with 8 sitting presidents in addition to the master class. When I talk to somebody about why they want to be president, the answer I get most often that it's some function of personal ambition. I was a provost, I was a department head. It's the next step in my career. And when I hear that as the reason for doing this, I shake my head. That's probably most of the people out there now. And I'm not criticizing them, but I totally get that. But when I talk to a Charlie Nelms or a Jim Rennick or a Fred Humphreys or a Jim Fisher or a Kenneth Shaw, when I ask them why they wanted to be president, they will say it's or you asked the congressman that we talked about earlier, they will talk about it as an act of service, not ambition. And when you go to difficult jobs in difficult places, and you're there because it's something on your resume, and you have to wait, and you're awake at 4 o'clock in the morning trying to figure out how to pick among all the choices are bad. What a lot of these people will do is, because they're there for the wrong reasons, they'll try to figure out what's the path of least resistance, what's the least risk for me, and what's the most, the one that's going to cause the last trauma. But if you're there because you're there to serve, the only thing you're thinking about is what's the best decision for this institution, even if it's the one that's the most difficult for you and the one that puts you at the highest risk. And those are the kinds of presidents that are doing fine, and they're successful. And in the middle of chaos and turmoil, they're doing fine. So these things about the value orientation, about why you do these jobs are not for everybody. They drain you. And they're not only a challenge for you, they're challenges for your family and people around you. You're under surveillance 24/7. They will drain you. But if at the same time, you're not being filled up by them, it's not sustainable. So this job was fulfilling to me for 35 years. And New Jersey is not an easy state. Particularly for a public institution. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, gosh, answers that question, and I had so many more. I guess folks are going to have to really go out and read the book From Protest to President, because we're actually running out of time here, and I so appreciate it. Just a couple more quick things I wanted to ask you about so people can get a little more insight on you. Ironically, when I was reading the book, sometimes I play music in the background. And my wife always said, how can you read a book and listen to music at the same time? I don't know. It's just background noise for me. But ironically, when I was reading, I got to a part where you were talking about Nancy Wilson being one of your favorite artists. Literally, when I was reading that part, there was a Supreme song playing in the background. What is it? Can't Take My Eyes Off of You, I think is what it was. So wanted to know, what was your favorite Nancy Wilson song?
Oh my, I don't have one. I
You
don't
don't
have
have
a
one?
favorite. No. I mean, I felt not only is she my favorite, I fell in love with Nancy Wilson. I mean, I told you the story. We got
Yeah.
stuck into a nightclub when I was like 18 years old, and I sat at the stage, and she's literally saying to me, I was done. I fell in love. I've got every album Nancy Wilson ever recorded. I don't
Yeah.
have a favorite one. I mean,
Okay.
I just can't do that. But no, she is by far my favorite singer. I mean, there's something special about her. She's just unique.
Yeah, no, my father used to talk about her too. And the other thing I wanted to ask you about, I just loved the story about how you and your wife came together after so many years, Just like me listening to that music and then you talking about Nancy Wilson, I don't think they're accidents or coincidences. God is just good that way. But it's hard to believe that the two of you knew each other in high school and then ran into each other, 30 plus years later at an airport. How often do you reflect on that chance meeting?
Oh, I think you're right. There are no accidents. I
Hmm.
mean, the way that happened, I mean, we hadn't seen us since high school. We ended up in the airport together. We're on an airplane. The seats assigned to us, each other, next to each other. You get, God kind of conspired, with me. I didn't have a chance. Can
Right, right. Exactly.
I say, and I know
Hmm.
we're running out of time,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
want to mention an extraordinary woman named Flonzie Brown Wright.
Okay.
I knew Flonzie when I was in Canton, extraordinary woman. I believe she was the first Black woman ever elected to political office in Mississippi, and she was instrumental in voting rights there. Her life was threatened. When Martin Luther King was coming through on the Meredith March, he asked Flonzie to do the great advance work for Canton. When the marchers got to Canton, they were attacked by the state police. They were beaten. My uncle was set up a field hospital to treat them. Flonzie, an extraordinary woman. She wrote a book called Looking Backwards to Move Ahead. And I was on a podcast with Flonzie, and there was a bunch of college students on there.
Hmm.
And they were bemoaning their sense of alienation and frustration and the sense of unfairness. And, they were complaining about all of that. And Flonzie listened to them quietly. And then she smiled and she said, the conditions that you describe are true and they're unfortunate and you should not accept them and you should work to change them. But I
Hmm.
don't want you to get discouraged because as someone that's lived a lot longer than you, I can tell you, and this is important for all of us, particularly given the current administration. What she told those young people, she says, as bad as things are and as you think they are better now than they have ever been. And that is true.
Hmm.
So when people are confronted with the things that we're going through now, stop wringing our hands, go engage and change them because things are better now than they ever been. And it's up to you. There is life is a relay race. And you take the baton from people that came before you and you run the next leg.
Right.
So there's a generation of people now. If you're unhappy with the way your life is, the way the world is, then change it, engage, pick up the baton and stop whining and complaining. And is it tough? Yes, it's tough. Is it easy? No, it's not easy. But it has never been easy and it's always been tough, but it's worth it. And so I hope that people that are concerned about it, I mean, diversity and equity and inclusion is under assault. If you listen to the language,
Hmm.
it's pretty troublesome. The people that don't like diversity, equity, and inclusion, now to be true, fair, there were excesses done under that mantle. There were things that shouldn't have happened done under the mantle of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the
Hmm.
opponents of it took those fringe things that were a little nuts,
Hmm.
amplified it, weaponized it, and they have used it to discredit it. But if you go back to the literal language of the word, if you don't believe in diversity, the opposite of diversity is homogeneity.
Hmm.
The word equity means fairness. If you don't believe in equity, then you don't believe in fairness. That means you believe in unfairness. And inclusion, the opposite of inclusion is exclusion. So if you don't like DEI, it means that what you are for is homogeneity, unfairness, and exclusion. That's not an America that I recognize. I
Right.
grew up in that America 50 years ago.
Hmm.
And that's not the America today. And I have to have faith that that's not the America that we're going to have going forward. But that depends on how we act. What scares me is the one society that I'm familiar with that believed in homogeneity, unfairness, and exclusion. The poster child for that was Germany in the 30s.
Hmm.
And so I don't think that's where we are. God hopes that that's where not we're going. But we have to be attention to what people are telling us and take them seriously. So those of us that are in this field that are under assault, You may can't use the words, you may have to walk away from the labels, but don't abandon the fight. It's the right fight, and it's the American fight. Don't get discouraged. Yeah, it's tough, but it's often tough, and you have to
Mhm.
respond accordingly. Don't stay in it, stay engaged, and don't give up.
That's a perfect ending. Thank you. Hopefully everybody can take heed to those words. Thank you, Dr. Pruitt. Your time was valuable. Our time was valuable, and your words were inspirational.
Thank you for having me. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
You keep the faith.